Hello, folks. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending upon your time zone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dennis Shaya, COO of Simplify, and I'll be moderating this webinar focused on security orchestration and automation in action. I'm joined by my colleagues Amos Stern, CEO of Simplify, as well as Arthur Hedge, CEO of Castle Ventures Corporation. Before I dive into the agenda and introductions, let me just share with the audience that to view the slides properly, you may have to enable Flash. So moving on, in terms of the agenda, I'll ask my colleagues momentarily to introduce themselves. We'll hear a little bit about Castle Ventures Corporation, talk about some of the challenges facing security teams and the role of security orchestration automation in responding to many of those challenges. And then we'll hear from Arthur, talk about, as a customer, their experience with security orchestration and helping to enable their SOC. And then at the end, we'll try to allow time for questions. If you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat, and we will dive right in. Let me now kind of turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. Amos, let's start with you.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. It's good to be here. Maybe just a really short introduction and bio of myself. So my name is Amos Stern. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Simplify. My background is starting from the Israeli Intelligence Corps. I've been there for almost a decade, running cybersecurity for technological units, and my responsibilities was mostly in charge of the infrastructure security as well as application security. And one of the other things I was doing after that was working in another defense contractor, building mostly security training centers. So basically training different security operations and incident response teams and how to respond to different threats. And we were emulating a lot of different types of attacks, and that basically brought us to understanding how this space works really, really well. Training probably, almost like 100 different SOC teams worldwide. And I'll dive into that a little bit more later on.
Hi, everyone.
Arthur?
Hi, everyone. This is Arthur Hedge from Castle Ventures Corporation. My background, I've been in the IT space, believe it or not, for over 30 years. I was an MIT student, and everyone just assumed I could program computers, so I became an application developer probably for the first 10 years of my career. Then went on to work for two different outsourcing companies, then moved into running a startup in the web document management space, which, believe it or not, migrated into the security space. And I've been in information security for over 10 years, primarily focused on insider threat and data protection. And just a little bit about Castle Ventures as a company. We really deliver three services to our client base. We're a managed security services provider. We do a lot of information security engineering projects where we help people implement security solutions. And we also are a VAR of information security solutions. And we primarily serve the mid-market. What we would define as customers with 200 to 10,000 employees. A lot of work, what we do is in the financial services space. That's over 50% of our business. Insurance, healthcare, higher education. And what most of these people have in common is they have data that they want to protect, especially in the financial services space. That data is valuable to them, not just to, regulators and compliance people. They care about their data, and I think that rings true with the hospitals, health insurance, and higher education spaces. They've got extremely valuable information about people that they want to protect. So our focus is really helping customers, identify and provide visibility into their critical data, and giving them the tools and solutions to protect, monitor, and audit access to that data. And we do that, again, as a project-based work and also as a managed security services provider, which is how we got hooked up with Simplify.
With that, let's talk about some of the challenges. Amos?
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. and thanks Arthur as well. So the way we thought about starting this is I'll just explain a little bit about what are the security operation challenges and what we saw out there in the market. And the story really started after I finished my trainings for the different SOC teams, and kind of like saw how things work and how incident responders work. And then from there we talk about, first of all, generically about the SOC and security orchestration, and then kind of like slide into how this actually works for MSSP, and Arthur could give his own perspective about how this helps, particularly the managed security service provider market as well. So it starts by this familiar slide that we've been investing a lot in the last maybe decade and more in different detection tools, and detection tools from every different category of security in the organization, the endpoint, the network, the access control, the data leakage, mobile, cloud, web application, database security, cloud security, and the list just goes on and on. And while we invested in all these different security tools, they're all very isolated and segmented and looking at particular aspects of security in the organization. And while we invested a lot in these detection tools, what happens after the detection was something that basically was left behind. And while the number of tools grew, so have the problem of what are we doing with all of these different detections, and how hard is it to actually maintain and operate so many different separate tools. And then sort of like an absurd situation emerged where just having more tools and more security tools doesn't necessarily equal having better security. And in order to understand a little bit, when we look at who actually needs to deal with all these different security tools, then eventually we're focusing on the SOC and the Security Operations Center. And there is an analyst or analyst team, typically not necessarily always called the SOC, or could be a team in charge of monitoring security, but typically there is a person or a team sitting there and needing to monitor all these different tools, typically through a SIM, but not necessarily. And then in order to respond, they need to understand alerts from different systems. Are they related to the others? Do they need to actually go into different tools in order to investigate farther, or even for doing the basic triage? When you receive an alert from your endpoint tool, it could be tens or hundreds or thousands, depends on the size of the organization of alerts. But that particular alert, just that isolated data point, is not necessarily enough in order to convict that alert and say this is a real threat. So then you need to start doing a more elaborate investigation, go to use different tools, and at some point it becomes impossible for just a person to be able to handle all of these different data sources, all these different types of alerts, and also be able to effectively operate so many different tools in a very, very deep technological know-how need in order to actually utilize all of them. And the absurd thing is that typically in the SOC, it's a location in the organization that's really hard to recruit for. We all know that there is a manpower shortage in this space, and also typically because the operation in the SOC requires a lot of mundane tasks, a lot of manual operations, is something that burns people, and after a couple of years, it's very typical for them to move over, and then it's also really hard to retain. There's high turnover of people there. So I mentioned a few of these points here on the left. There's just a high alert load. The more security systems that we added into our arsenal might protect us against a particular use case or a particular attack type, but still it occludes our visibility and basically hinders the analyst in seeing the full picture if there's just more and more disparate alerts. Lack of context, as I mentioned, is each of these systems has its own lens and looking at a particular aspect, be it the endpoint or what's happening there, or the network, or the email, phishing detection, or threat intel, or vulnerability. They all have their own particular lens and are agnostic to what happens outside of their view. All these tools are disparate, and the analyst needs to operate them manually and differently, and need to know how to operate them differently. And then obviously there's a lot of manual operations. There's not a lot of automation still in the security operation, which is part of what we're talking about here today. And last but not least, because I already mentioned manpower shortage, is inconsistent procedures, meaning that we need to rely on essentially the people knowing what to be doing and repeatedly doing it, and every person or every analyst could be responding differently to particular alerts. And while some of us already implemented some incident response procedures and typically help them in either a wiki or a Visio or something that helps us be consistent, typically we see that it's very, very difficult for organizations to have a consistent and repeatable response procedure for every kind of type of alert. So if there's a malware detection in your organization, how is this being handled? What are the steps? Do you have a predefined know-how of how do you want to respond? How do you want the analysts to respond to this particular incident? So these are some of the challenges that are flooding the SOC. And go to the next slide here. So basically, how do we solve this problem? This is where orchestration comes into play, and what's its role in the SOC? So as I mentioned, there's a lot of these different tools. Integrate in the security orchestration, if I really try to boil it down into three main bullet points, and Gartner and Forrester and ESG and all the analyst firms, they all describe it very, very similarly in different acronyms, but all essentially say we can't have all these different tools just running on separately. They have to be able to cooperate, and you want your new tool that you buy to be immediately working with the rest. You don't want each tool to be working separately. So first, we need to integrate all these tools together for a better defense. Then we need to be able to implement a consistent response procedure, meaning that for every type of threat, we know how to respond. We have a repeatable, measurable, consistent process of how to do that. And then we can start automating anything out of that. So essentially, if you double-click on that, there are three different aspects or tenets in the SOC. Right? There's the people, the process, and technology, like the old triad. The people be the analysts, and the processes, meaning what incident response procedures need to happen and how do you respond to particular threats, and the technology, again, like these tools. And they are very separate, and what orchestration is another way of looking at it. What orchestration comes to do is bringing together all these different pieces of the puzzle, and essentially weave together the analysts, the processes of how to respond, and the technologies. And then once you have really a centralized management and a cohesive process of how to respond to incidents that weaves together the analysts in the right time, the different technologies, and the incident response processes, then you can start automating pieces of that. And I usually like to say, when we say orchestration automation, we say it like in one word, but orchestration is first managing this whole process from one end to the other with the people and the incident response processes across all the different technologies. Once you have that, it could even be, first it could even be just manual process, but from one single pane of glass. If you have that, then you can start building automation into that sequence. And I also like to think about it as, we call it a security operation. So operation meaning that there's different components of the operation that needs to happen, like a management, a consistent process, like a playbook, KPI that you measure how things work in this operation, some automation. And for example, if you look at sales operation, then all these things happen, and they happen on, for example, a Salesforce. And if you look at marketing, there's for example, HubSpot or Marketo that helps run this operation. HR can have Workday, and where do we run security operations? And so this is something that security orchestration is coming to do, becoming the nucleus of the SOC and help run the operation. So just to illustrate that a little bit, we can look at like the current state, basically, and a lot of the SOC still, when alert comes in, it typically goes directly to an analyst. And this analyst first goes and collects some data, tries to triage the event, understand if this is something that actually is malicious or not. Sometimes needs to go to do some deeper investigation. Then the second stage would be to make a decision based out of these findings. And then the third one is to actually execute the response. And this is something that in scale, and when there's a lot of different alerts, is really impossible for a person to do in depth for each type of these alerts. And so what orchestration, again, comes here to offer is to change a little bit the perspective, and while leaving the analyst and the person in the loop, in order to be able to respond to each and every individual threat and do this in depth and not just in a shallow way, like a swipe right, swipe left with the different alerts that's coming in, then we put the machine with obviously the built-in process of what to do for each and every type of alert. The machine actually goes and does that automatically, and after collecting the data and doing the first triage and sometimes more deep dive investigation, then presents the data to the analyst to make a decision, decide, okay, is this something that really is malicious or not, choose the course of action, and then again, the person does not need to actually execute the course of action, but can select what should happen next, and then the machine can continue to do the automation, the execution of that. Basically, offloading all these mundane tasks from the analyst and leaving them to make a decision, which is what we expect the person to do in the loop, which also enables the analyst to then focus on more high-level tasks, more high-level incidents, and basically be able to use their knowledge and basically become, like, if it's a tier 1, become a tier 2 analyst, and worry about actually investigating and not doing data collection and then what I like to call data mongering. So if you look at the modern SOC or the future SOC technology footprint, what I envision is something like this, that in the middle there is an orchestration. Orchestration, again, is not only about the automation or only about a playbook that automates a few different steps, but it is the nucleus that connects everything together, that provides the management console for the SOC analyst and for the SOC manager to run this operation. It includes also the playbooks of how to respond to particular incidents and how to respond to particular threats. And it also integrates all the different security technologies together, that when there needs to be an action taken or an enrichment or bringing more data from some other siloed security system to that analysis, then it can do this from a centralized location. So with that introduction of just a general understanding of the challenges of the SOC and how orchestration is built in order to help you respond and help you deal with these challenges and run the SOC in a more efficient way, I'd like to hand it back to Arthur to just take us a little bit through how what this means to the managed security services space.
Thank you, Amos. So I think I'm going to do this in terms of telling the story about how we got connected with Simplify and why we ended up choosing them as our partner. We have a financial services customer, an investment bank, very progressive, well-run organization from an IT and security perspective. I mean, probably one of the best-run customers that we have. And the CIO there and his team are always trying to get better, right? There is a constant desire within their organization to always improve how they deliver services to their clients and their investment banking clients, and also to the internal team at this investment bank. And that aligns very much with one of our core values is we're always trying to improve. So over the course of the last year, the feedback from their auditors was that they were a very secure organization, but they could improve their reporting. That was the one thing that the auditors said, hey, we want to do something about this. And you'll see the 3 requirements that we started with align with kind of the 3 tenets of security orchestration. But we essentially said, hey, we need to improve our incident reporting, which really meant we needed to integrate together the security tools, because we'd get the reports out of the antivirus solution, but we wouldn't send those off to the SIM if they were auto-remediated. So, we were getting multiple, and that's one example of how we were getting multiple reports from different tools. And there wasn't a consistent process for reporting on that. So that was kind of driver number 1. Number 2 was we wanted to improve information sharing between ourselves as a managed service provider and with the customer and end user. I mean, we work very cooperatively with their team to respond to and prevent security incidents. So that's really, the second tenet that Amos mentioned about implementing consistent response procedures is really what was underlying technically what we were trying to get at there, is how we can improve the sharing of information between us and our customer. And finally, the third thing that we wanted to do is improve the effectiveness of our information security team. As Amos mentioned, there is a huge volume of information that every security operations organization has to deal with, and at some level it's really overwhelming. Most of the people that have had breaches, the data was in their systems. It was just not responded to, or nobody picked up on it. So in our particular case, we said, hey, we need to do something about this to kind of address those issues, which is, we want to improve our reporting, which is integrating our security tools together, make sure that the customer and us were responding, from the same playbook, and 3, automate wherever possible so that we can be more effective. So this particular client we're managing with ArcSight, and so that was a requirement that we had with the solution. And some of the things that we wanted to do was, essentially capture both the things that humans were doing as well as what the systems were doing, like the auto-remediation of, antivirus attacks and things like that, which, no human was looking at before, but we wanted to integrate that at least so that we could see that as a picture, part of the whole. So that's kind of where we started in this whole thing. What's interesting is, we picked this to solve a particular customer problem, but meanwhile we were throughout the entire analysis, and we looked at, most of the security orchestration platforms out there and different approaches that we could do to do this. Not only do we want to solve these customer needs, but we also needed something that was in a multi-tenant capacity, as this was going to be a central focus of our, improvement efforts over the next couple of years to make sure that we can take advantage of the promises of security orchestration and really improve our effectiveness as a managed security services provider by coming up with consistent approaches across our customer base for automating things where possible, especially in some of the more esoteric investigations. I mean, one thing that's, I think, even started since we've gone down this path is there are things that we are considering to automate or standardize that we never would have considered had we not selected Simplify. Not all of those have been implemented yet, but just the possibility of doing some things that we never would have considered before, I think, is going to be another benefit out of this process. Some really, as I said, we focused a lot on data-centric security. And one of the things is when we do investigations, we have to gather a lot of information to say, okay, what data did people look at? What did they do with it? So on and so forth. So this will be able to provide us a platform where we can pull that stuff in together into one common single lens to see what's going on with that particular investigation, even from tools that are disparate and we wouldn't have thought to combine in the past. So that's one of the interesting benefits that we did not anticipate, but I think is gonna come out of the Simplify implementation, is we will end up being even better than we thought, because we're going to approach things in an automated fashion that we would not have considered before. And so I think what this leads to is, at the end of the day, a superior customer experience. I mean, they're going to have a greater understanding of what's going on inside their environment, and it'll make them look better to their auditors and to their management, so that they can demonstrate exactly what's going on in their environment. And I think the same thing will be true with us, in the sense that people will have a better understanding of how difficult security is, but also the progress that we're making in terms of dealing with threats and so on and so forth. So I think, there is a perceived benefit in the sense that, people will see the benefits that security orchestration provides, and in fact, it will actually be providing those benefits. Because a lot of times when you're doing things in security under the covers, it's very difficult to demonstrate that you are doing X, Y, and Z in a consistent fashion, and I think Simplify is going to help us provide that type of exposure to our customer base, which from a service provider perspective is a very good thing. And from our client's perspective, I think they'll have the ability to go to their senior management and demonstrate a level of improvement that they didn't anticipate as well. From an operational perspective at Castle Ventures, certainly it's going to help us to bring on new customers and standardize how we deal with them over time, so that we can get a new client up and running faster and at a better quality of service from the beginning in this whole process. And then obviously, as Amos mentioned, the skill shortage and the difficulty of providing excellent service in the security space, there's a lot of tribal knowledge that organizations have that isn't captured. It's in people's heads. So this kind of solution allows us to put some of that tribal knowledge into an automated process, so that we can put context around events that take place, and it will be there the next time we have to solve that problem. So, we're going to be able to get more effective. I think that provides benefits in two ways. One, it gets analysts up to speed faster than we would without Simplify. And secondly, it's going to make the best analysts even better, because they're not doing the grunt work over and over and over again. The best guys are probably going to be able to do things even faster than they can today. So in some ways it may make them more effective and allow them to share their expertise with other people on our team. So I'll put my pressure on my team to do that. So but those are the three, I think, long-term benefits that we're going to see with this is, our clients are going to be happier because they have a better understanding of what their security posture is. Two, it's going to allow us to scale and onboard new customers quicker. And three, it's going to improve the effectiveness of my analyst team and the ability for them to respond to security incidents in a consistent fashion. And I think, through this process, just to kind of reiterate what we were looking for in an orchestration solution. Our top three things, the incident reporting, the information sharing, and the effectiveness of our security team, that aligns quite nicely with the three things that, Amos mentioned they were trying to do when they designed Simplify: integrate together security tools, implement consistent response procedures, and automate wherever possible. Those are certainly what we've gotten out of this solution. I think the other thing that we liked as Simplify as an organization was the flexibility and ease of dealing with them, and their long-term vision for where to take this, and as a robust orchestration platform. Because the world's evolving and it's getting more and more complex, so you need a vendor like Simplify who's prepared and willing to move with how the industry moves. So that was a big portion of what we wanted out of this, is somebody who had the flexibility to deliver robust solutions to our customers that met our needs. And very simple. They did what we needed, and we've been very happy with our relationship with Simplify. So with that, I will turn it back over to Amos.
All right. Thank you, Arthur. So what I think we're going to do a little bit next is I wanted to try to share some of our experiences with the different security orchestration deployments, both on the enterprise kind of SOC and the managed security service provider. And we, in this process and in working with customers, we learned a lot, and we learned what makes an orchestration deployment work, and most importantly, what can help SOCs really actually do this change, because it essentially requires organizations or security operations teams to embrace a new kind of type of thinking, and it requires them to change a little bit the way that they were used to work before. And in order to do that in a right way that will actually be very successful, there are a few points that we noticed along the way that are very important to notice. So if you're considering an orchestration project, these were a few of the scars on our back we learned that I think would be very important to notice and make sure that they have a good focus. So I think that the most, maybe something that's obvious, but start where the most value is, meaning that there's a lot of things to do in an orchestration solution and in the SOC, and just choosing when doing a deployment the most high-level priority things that we want to be doing and focusing on them and making sure that those are successful, and then expanding from there instead of trying to boil the ocean. So usually, typically, we saw that focusing on, let's say, 4, 5, 6 different use cases, and typically the high priority cases, or what are the things that are really high priority for the organization, what type of threats are really high priority, and focusing on those instead of what comes up in the SIM, just starting from the specific ones that we define that are the most important ones for us, what has the highest risk, and start implementing processes and procedures for those. And those typically help you really understand the power of orchestration, because it forces us to think, okay, for these particular types of threats, what systems are needed in order to actually help triage or investigate that farther. So, we need to integrate to the Active Directory. We need to collect some vulnerability data to make sure this is more prioritized. Maybe we need to connect back to like a Splunk or a Logstash to query some data that's there that we don't have in the alert. Maybe we need to go to the EDR solution and pull out more data about where else this process is running. And so this really helps with the thinking of what do we need in terms of like technology integration. Then it helps us think what is actually the process that we need to be taking. So instead of saying, an alert from the endpoint tool that says this is a generic malware detection, now let's deal with this. Basically, like let's let the analyst decide what to do. We can think quietly and say, when this alert comes in, what do we want to happen? And then we lay that out and basically map the entire process. And then you can see that things start to branch, and you say, if this is happening on an endpoint, that this endpoint belongs to this person, or this endpoint is an admin endpoint, or this user that was logged in, and actually the alert came from was this particular group of the others. Then sometimes you want to have maybe a different response. And when you have time to be thinking about it, not during an actual alert, an actual threat, then you can start building those in a more consistent way. And obviously, and typically most of these things, us and I'm sure all our orchestration providers, we already work really hard to create a large knowledge base and know-how in order to help say, these are the things, these are the particular use cases, these are the playbooks that are typically being used, and then they can obviously be easily modified. And so, the next bullet, was a little bit too long on this first one, is to first start with manual workflows. So many people ask me, do I then start immediately with automation? And sometimes people say, I don't want to automate immediately, and I'm not ready to automate. And so typically what we saw is that the right way to do this is, again, start with these high severity and high priority threats, but don't immediately automate. Start with implementing the process. What is the playbook that you want the analyst to respond with? What are the technology integrations for that? Implement that process, but still leave it manual, just at the beginning. And then what the analyst can go step by step through that and say, this is the first action, doing it. That's the second action, I'm doing this. And everything obviously is audited. And once you build trust in that process, and you say, okay, this is really a consistent process. It really covers like all the different branching and all the different different scenarios, or at least to the point where this is satisfactory and I trust this process. Then you can start automating different pieces. And it never is a 0 or 100. It always is a mix between manual and automated actions. But once you have this laid out, then you can select, oh, these actions I'm willing to automate. And then the other ones I'm not. And then slowly you can, as you build more trust, you can change more actions to be more automated. Which brings me to the next point. Typically the best way to feel the value and not be concerned about the business impact is starting to automate first triage and alert enrichment and these kind of tasks that really essentially eliminate the data collection and data mongering actions that the SOC analysts are being burned from, and at the same time shows how the automation works and how this orchestration of different actions provides value. And if you start from there, it really helps to build it both shows a lot of value and saves a lot of time, and then it also helps build trust in that automation process. And then the next step would be more for mitigative actions. Another point that we saw that really is important is to make sure that the analysts and the SOC team, they're involved and understand how these playbooks work, and it is something that's easy for them to do. And if they need to be, knowing, we don't want analysts to know how to write code or need to be very sophisticated engineers, but we want our lead analysts or SOC managers to be able to define these playbooks, build them really, really easily, and be able to change them upon need, because this is not something that's set in stone. While a process is running or a playbook is defined, it will always be changed, but the changes, as we handle different threats, the changes could be immediately implemented into the playbook, which will then be used in the next kind of alert that will come in. And if we do this in this manner, we basically, like Arthur was saying, we capture the tribal knowledge. And this way, slowly we'll have more and more iterations, but it really is important to make sure that it's something that the analysts and the lead analyst at least and the SOC manager understand and they know how to change these things, because if they're not, then what happens is that they start drifting off that path and maybe start doing things, again, that are not in this process and not necessarily audited or not necessarily things that we anticipated. And if we start branching this way, then an orchestration system can be harder to implement. And you want really to capture that knowledge, and the analysts and the SOC managers to incorporate that knowledge into the system and keep updating these playbooks there. And then you essentially have a knowledge base of all the incident response procedures in your organization, and they're a living being. They keep changing, they keep updating, they keep being better, and they keep being better fit to your specific needs and business needs. And then obviously you can always extract them or export them, and have also for auditor purposes is something that really helps having all these playbooks and incident response procedures in one place. Then after that, slowly we're getting more and more down the line of the process, just to make sure that the full SOC process is captured. Meaning that you want the SOC to less and less switch contacts between different tools, and make sure that if they need to switch contacts, what do they need to do it for? And make sure that this data we can bring in through the integration or through an automation, and just basically pull this data and help bring it into the playbook instead of having to stop, switch, go to a different tool, and so on. And also that just to make sure the full process in terms of every type of alert. So you don't want only 5 or 10 types of alerts that will have a playbook, and the rest would be we'll see how it goes. But you want to be able to essentially, for every type of alert, have some sort of consistent process. So this is something that really is important for making sure the deployment is successful. Just being cognizant of time, I'll have to speed up myself. So visibility is something I didn't touch a lot about, but it's really important to be able to show KPIs, because before we have an orchestration system, it's typically very hard to understand, okay, what are the performance of the SOC? How many alerts are we dealing with? What's the dwell time for malware detected versus phishing? How long does it take to respond? And this thing, once you have everything orchestrated and managed in a central location, it's really easy to monitor and report on that. And if you report on that and you measure the operation, then you can improve it. And of course, define reports to be able to also send automatically to the managers and to key stakeholders to be able to see the value and the ROI that's being saved. I think I'll go through this really briefly, as we want to leave some time for Q&A. Essentially, there's three main values that orchestration can provide to different SOC teams and MSSPs. Like for the analysts, obviously, just helping to deal with all the alerts and helping to implement consistent processes and helping them to work with disparate tools. And for the SOC managers, really helps to deal with the shortage of analysts, with the inconsistent skills to basically help have a centralized know-how, how to respond, visibility into the people, the process, the technology, what systems is producing most false positive, which system is more effective, what our analysts are more effective, and obviously measure these KPI. And for the leaders of the organization, really gives them visibility into what happens, more confidence in the team, and really shortens the response times, which typically is something that affects really the business. Just in short, to summarize, the key benefits of orchestration and the 4 bullets is centralized management for SOC and our teams, consistency, both in manual and automated playbooks, enhanced investigation and measurement and improvement and reporting on that. And with that, I'll hand it back to Dennis.
Thank you, Amos and Arthur. So we have just a few minutes left, but there were some interesting questions posed by the audience. And so let me paraphrase a little bit, and in a couple of minutes left, pose a couple of these questions. First and I think this is appropriate to you, Arthur. You, no doubt, in your role, you are bombarded with different opportunities to invest in different security solutions. Why did you prioritize an investment in security orchestration?
If I look at, I would say the number one reason that we are doing this is to really get a common playbook / presentation of security, investigative results to our clients, right? I think consistency across my client base and the analyst base is probably the number one reason that we're doing this. So consistency of approach, because it's very complex work. The security work can be very complex, so I think that this will help in that answer. I mean, there's no one answer, but I tried to give you the top reason.
Okay, very good. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna add something else to that. I think like Amos mentioned, some of the other business processes that are out there, like sales and marketing, have benefited from security orchestration or sales orchestration has been out there for almost 20 years. If you talk to Salesforce, right, they say they've been doing this for 20 years, right? So in some ways, security is 20 years behind the times, and we should be doing this today, right? In the sense that the consistency of an approach, business process approach is very critical to our industry if we're going to grow. So I think that's very important. I mean, security orchestration across the board has lots of benefits, and people need to investigate it.
Very good. Thank you. So we're coming up at the 45-minute mark, but we'll go a minute or two over here. Almost in 60 seconds or less. When you talked about this broad functionality of security orchestration and the different capabilities and attributes of it, but are there aspects from a functionality perspective that consistently come up as the bigger priority that are the driving force behind this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think typically when people ask me, they ask, do I jump into automation? And then you asked about what are the key components, or if there's anything that's usually jumping in more into people's minds. I think automation would be the easiest one for people to relate to, and they typically say, yeah, automation is something that can really help me save time and money and have a better instant response and faster instant response. But then they also, at the same time, they say, wait, but how do I get to automation? How do I jump there? There's like a little bit of a gap between where I'm now and being able to automate. And then actually it leads me to the other, less sexy part of the component, which is the management one. And so I think these two together really are the most important. This is why you need, and Arthur mentioned before, like a comprehensive system that allows you to both manage, even if it's completely manual, but just manage the incident and have a consistent process, and then you can effectively add automation into that.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, thank you. So we're about out of time. Let me thank the audience for spending a little time with us this afternoon. And Arthur, Amos, thank you very much. That was insightful. And at this point, we'll conclude. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.